All right, welcome, bienvenue, swagatam. On behalf of the American Graduate School of Paris, I'm pleased to welcome you all to a panel of experts drawn from AGS and Arcadia faculty. Some of you may know that, in fact, this event is the second part of the AGS, election series. Maybe we'll have a third one. The first one took place on November 3rd. We had a panel based on experts talking about the specific impacts on geographical regions or countries that they picked, assessing a Trump versus Biden victory. The panel today, I thought, would be a good idea to sort of make it more thematic and issue-based rather than regions. So I found a title for it called Post-America First and the Future of the Liberal World Order. The Liberal International Order, also referred to as a rule-based international order, or the US-led liberal international order, is essentially a body of rules, norms, and institutions that govern international affairs. It's organized around principles of international cooperation through multilateral institutions like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, open markets, security cooperation, promotion of liberal democracy, and leadership by the US and its allies. Washington was the founder of this traditional order and anchored it for the past half a century. The global order was already under strain before the Trump presidency, so we can't blame it all on him. With Donald Trump, however, coming to power, the liberal international order gave way to what a few observers have called isolationism, what with America first and make America great again. Trump withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, threatened to terminate NAFTA, slapped import tariffs on US allies, abandoned the global Paris Accord, scuttled the deal curbing Iran's nuclear ambitions, questioned America's commitment to NATO. The list is long, including pulling out American troops from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and most recently, from today's news, Somalia. The retreat from the liberal international order sounded alarm for the entire world. To be fair, it's not Donald Trump's presidency alone that opens up questions about the liberal order. It worsened it. Whether or not it comes back, it remains to be unseen. Even prior to Donald Trump, the international order had begun to fall apart. Political systems were being threatened by populism, authoritarian powers were flouting long accepted rules, economies were being disrupted by technology and globalization, failed states were posing threats, power shifts were questioning the role and influence of the United States as a leader and guarantor of global order. Then came the Trump election. The existing pessimism became deep-seated, and what came next, IR pundits argue, would be either an entirely new order or a period with no real order at all. But as President Ford, in his famous 1974 inauguration speech said, "Our long national nightmare is over." I couldn't say it better than that. Trump lost, Biden won. But what about the liberal international order? Did it die as well? What next? Can it be saved? Those are some of the questions that we'll be grappling, keeping in mind the Biden-Harris presidency for the United States as well as for the world. Our panel today will discuss some of these issues and more. I don't want to lose time sort of introducing each member of the panel because they have long stories decorating their very exciting careers. You can just Google search them and you'll probably find something on them. The list of panelists for tonight, we will start in this order. Ambassador Dominique Dreyer will talk about world order, or disorder for that matter. Ambassador Michael Einik on diplomacy and statecraft. Professor Roland Adjovi on the United Nations and international law. Professor Haffar on human rights as a necessary building block. Professor Douglas Yates on democracy and constitutionalism. Professor Mariam Habibi on nuclear proliferation. Professor Joav Toker on news impacts truths. And myself, I guess I called my little blurb, not America first, but planet first. I will also be the moderator, or if you'd like, master of ceremonies for this event. Once the panelists are done speaking, we will open up to a lively, hopefully lively Q&A session. While we are in discussion, please feel free to use the chat function to either talk, discuss, comment, or send questions. I forgot to do this, but I believe that our panel is being recorded. So if there's anyone who may be concerned about that, please let us know. But otherwise, it in fact already got recorded, but it was just me so far. So I guess we were safe. So if there's anyone who has an issue with it, let me know through the chat. Okay, I don't see any message pop up, so I'm guessing we're okay with that. So at this point, I will welcome Ambassador Dominique Dreyer to talk about world order or disorder, whatever the case may be. Dominique.
Well, thank you very much, Ruchi. Well, when I saw the list of topics that were going to be discussed, I thought that of course, the most interesting and maybe the most provocative one was the word world order. It does seem that we don't live in a world of order, but rather a world of disorder. And of course, there is probably a question of definition that has to be talked about with it. I had the curiosity of going on the internet to see what is being said about under world order, and I happened to see the book of Kissinger called World Order, in which he distinguishes in world history 4 types of orders, and the 4th one being what he calls democratic idealism of America. Well, that is probably more or less what is also being called as being the Washington consensus, and what has been actually aptly described by Ruchi as the alliance of Western countries around Washington, this type of relations based on agreements, treaties, institutions, which has actually been the most major feature of our world after Second World War. Probably it should not be forgotten that the world order that has been created after the disaster of the Second World War did not come from nowhere. Actually, it was also based of all the developments that have taken place already since the end of the 19th century, at least, and probably a bit before, because I think that probably the word world order actually is probably more aptly to be defined as a kind of aspiration. I think the world actually aspires to be a world in order. And if we see the development in international relations since the 19th century, I always think that, for instance, the major reform of Japan, which actually had the result of creating almost a world power in a matter of 30 years at the end of the 19th century, was very heavily inspired what all the developments that had taken place in Europe. And so somewhere, I think it shows that the world is really aspiring to be living in a state of harmony, in a state of regulation. And I think probably we should think about this kind of state of mind that has been actually certainly one of the main features of, I think, world history, at least since the last 2 centuries. Now, there is no doubt that the world has been very, I would say, the Western world, or even the whole world, a kind of globalization that we have seen developing since the Second World War has was heavily based on the leadership of the United States. And so probably the word Washington consensus is a very apt description of what has taken place. It is often or at least some authors are comparing this Washington consensus to what they call Beijing consensus. And I think there is no such thing as Beijing consensus. There is a policy by China, which has become very important because China has become important, but a policy that is actually purely a decision taken, or at least a set of policies decided by the Communist Party, and it's not based on a large alliance of countries, on a large alliance of institutions. So you can't really speak of a Beijing consensus. But what you see in this kind of concept is that, of course, China has become one of the world power. And I think nothing can be done in our world today without taking into account the emergence of China. I wonder whether the recent political developments in the United States is not being somehow, has not somehow become a kind of obsession, because we are, of course, very much concerned what happens in the United States. The 4 years of Trump's leadership has not been very happy ones, to say the least. But I think on the whole, we have to see also that the Western world is based largely on fairly stable and solid democratic institutions. There are crises everywhere. But still, I think even populism, I mean, which has become very important in some places, I think has not really undermined the stability of the most important democratic countries in the world. And I think if you refer to France, I mean, populism is strong in France, but I mean, it never surpassed about 30% of the votes. Populism in Italy has also faced a number of reversals. And what happens in the Eastern European countries, where populism is also fairly strong, I mean, you have also to consider that these countries have come out of about 40 or 50 years of authoritarian communist regimes, and probably you can't expect these countries to regain a kind of state of stability and of proper democracies in a very short time. So I think we should probably not overestimate the adverse effects of the 4 years of Trump. I would say attempts to destroy what we regard as being the liberal order. And we have also to see, I mean, Ruchi has rightly stressed that there's been a lot of crises taking place before the Trump presidency. And I think this is absolutely true. And if we take a crisis like the 2008 financial crisis, it has been a very strong, a very tough kind of crisis for the whole of the Western world, for the whole of the world actually, but of course especially for the Western world, and also for institutions like the European Union. And I would say that European Union has survived fairly well this crisis caused by these financial problems in 2008. We have to look also at the future challenges that are facing us. And of course, you have also mentioned these challenges. I mean, global warming, pandemics, which is of course something that has been very surprising, but actually it's not the first time that the world has faced a major pandemic. Our challenges are, of course, new technologies. I think we have been facing new technology for about 20 or 30 years only. Just imagine all the developments that will take place in the next 50 or 60 years, taking into account how fast the whole world population is now using iPhones. making communications very easy, very cheap, and so that actually anything that happens in some part of the world becomes known immediately in all the other parts of the world. This, of course, has also major consequences for the way governance is taking place, including in China, where 300 or 400,000 people have been mobilized to try to control internet and to control communication between individuals in China. So in my view, I think the future will depend very much on the way a closer collaboration will take place between the main actors in this world. I'm not talking about Switzerland. Small countries can only have very little influence, of course, but I'm talking about the major actors, and of course America, China are major actors. Also some important Asian countries like Japan and of course India are also some actors. I would think that a country like India in some ways is fairly disappointing because it is 1 billion people who have a very educated elite, who have also a huge amount of enterprises of technology, and the kind of small influence it has in the world is something that always surprises me. But on this kind of interaction between major countries, we should also mention Europe. Of course, the way Europe is developing is also slightly somehow disappointing. And I think the saddest thing is actually the Brexit, the fact that the United Kingdom, which is one of the important European countries, is no more part of the European Union. This will, of course, weaken somehow the European Union. And Europe should be in a position to play a kind of counterbalancing in the world. And I think it is not able to play this role because European Union is a kind of confederation of states where all the decisions have to be taken by a number of actors who don't share the same opinions, the same kind of worldview. And all this complicates, of course, the role that Europe could play in this kind of major developments that are going to take place in the future. Am I still... Can I stop with that? I think I'm within my 8 minutes or 10 minutes.
Yeah, that would be great. You're at 12 minutes, is it? I don't know. But don't worry, that's perfect. All right, great. I think Ambassador Dreyer set the stage for the rest of our little speeches to come. So I'm going to go ahead and invite Ambassador Michael Einik to talk about diplomacy and statecraft.
All right, thank you very much, Ruchi. I took this to mean basically to offer you some general observations about how the Biden administration will actually do diplomacy and statecraft. The observations obviously have to be rather general. There's been really no clear strategy or objective pronouncements, but what we have is an announcement of who will be doing the diplomacy and statecraft. And this is somewhat of a unique group of individuals. I don't think I can recall a previous administration where the team has been so expert and so steeped in foreign policy and diplomacy. In terms of that, and it is a team, there's really no alpha male or alpha female. There's no Henry Kissinger in this group. This is a group of people, frankly, many of whom I know, who are me in a sense, who have worked together pretty much since through the Obama years, where they gained their experience. They are quite professional. It's probably one of the first administrations where there hasn't really been a political appointee running the State Department or the National Security Council. And I think this reflects the fact that President-elect Biden comes from the Washington establishment, having been vice president for 8 years, having been in the Senate. So he's not an outsider bringing in people he is comfortable with. The people he is comfortable with are the people who have been in the system. So this is a group of people that if you want to focus on domestic issues, they can run your foreign policy on autopilot. They're not going to make any mistakes. They're not going to get you any trouble. You will be safe with these people. That's the good news. The bad news is I've been in this kind of group. These people they talk in shorthand. I mean, outsiders will have trouble understanding what they're saying because they have this similar frame of reference. And when they talk about complicated issues, they talk about it very much in shorthand because they have the same identical frame of reference. Which means what I don't see is who's going to be the catalyst for the outside idea, the new initiative. What you've got right now is a team that can bring you back to the future with Hillary Clinton's second administration foreign policy, if she had one. And to a certain extent, that has always been the political appointee, who as a professional, we've always didn't like these people imposing themselves on us. But they were the people who thought, in a sense, out of the box, who didn't know the conventional wisdom, who didn't know the shorthand, and forced the professionals to reach out to broaden their own perspectives. And you don't really see who that's going to be. Not to say there won't be someone, and not to say it won't be the president himself. But it's still not clear where that's going to be. So this is a safe team, but I don't see it yet as a team that is going to be creative in the sense of the new and emerging issues that Ambassador Dreyer has mentioned that has been plaguing the world for quite some time. So it's a team that is unique in that function. As I say, to a certain extent, the National Security Advisor is probably the more junior of the group. But it's a group that will probably, at least for the time being, work in somewhat harmony until they realize that their specific organizations, be it the State Department, the NSC, or the CIA, have different priorities. And that where you may start getting some conflict between them, as is the case. But it is a rather unique team in that context. In terms of moving forward, in terms of management of diplomacy, this is really a saving of the State Department. Ambassador or Secretary Designate, he's not yet Secretary Designate, Blinken comes from the administration of the State Department. The others in the foreign policy apparatus know the State Department. So we can anticipate a revival of the State Department, so to speak. A revival of the role of the embassies abroad, of the use of the ambassador as substantive foreign policy implementers, of managers of policy. So there should be more funding. There should be more recruitment. What I don't see, however, is success in renovating the culture of the State Department. These people have been involved in a lot of work recently on how to reform the State Department. And we've been trying to reform the State Department since I joined 50 years ago. Even in 1972, we were talking about making the State Department look more like America. And we have suffered in trying to do that and have been relatively unsuccessful in doing that. And I think the solutions these people are going to suggest to do that, again, are suggestions we've been stressing for the past 50 years, and they're not ones that will be successful. And that's unfortunate. But again, the State Department will do better. There'll be more funding. There'll be more use of the State Department, I think. It really depends. I don't see, for example, the Vice President's office taking a larger role than is traditional, not being a Vice President Cheney, for example. The Vice President-elect has appointed her National Security Advisor, who's from the same group, from the same family of State Department officers. So it's interesting because when State Department officers have been in senior positions before, it has not been successful because they have not been able to counter the weight and the influence of political appointees and who are usually closer to the president. But in this case, there aren't any political appointees. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. One other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of organization, and I won't go too much into this because Ruchi will be talking about that, and that's the appointment of an environmental czar, former Secretary Kerry. This augurs well. And I think it's clear that most people anticipate that the U.S. will rejoin the Paris Accord, that it'll get more engaged in this. But I have to say, in the past, czars in the U.S. system have not fared well. It's been a way to highlight an issue, but in the Washington organization structure, unless you have, there's some feedback here.
Yeah, someone hasn't muted themselves and probably a flush.
Okay. And in Washington organization structure, the people of influence are the people who have resources. They control organizations. They control money. And it remains to be seen whether or not Secretary Kerry will in fact be that way. I don't think it's a coincidence that Foreign Affairs has recently published a very interesting article, an important article, I think, on the issue of foreign policy is climate policy. The Wilson Center has done a rather long study on this as well. And I think there's an awareness that environment has to be more integrated into American foreign policy. But I don't see necessarily that that's going to happen. I mean, I would have been a bit more comfortable if the environmental czar was the vice president and she was given the assets to do this. But I really personally don't think that the U.S. is going to be successful in addressing this issue until you, in fact, get, as we have a Homeland Security Department that's a mega department that have brought together a lot of agencies that deal with security, until we have an environmental security department that actually takes over and controls assets in the U.S. State Department, in the U.S. government that deals with environmental issues. I mean, until the environmental czar could win the argument that we should not put sanctions on China because we need China's for trade, because we need China's cooperation on the environment, until that day happens, I really don't see that we've integrated or will integrate China into the U.S. Foreign policy, the environment into the U.S. foreign policy. Okay, very quickly, the last thing I wanted to give is a few impressions about the natural inclinations of this team. I think the tilt to Asia that Obama had tried to, but was unsuccessful, will go ahead at this point. I think it'll be with China as the aggressor, but I think the difference between this administration and Trump administration is that the U.S. will do this in terms of trying to build coalitions to counter China in different areas. I don't necessarily see the U.S. rejoining or trying to rejoin the trade agreements. I think that the trade agreements probably a little domestically too difficult for the U.S. Very quickly, I think to a certain extent, Europe will be less and less a focus for the U.S. I think Macron's use of the Trump as a vehicle to energize Europe, to do more in terms of security and its own independence will now sort of fade somewhat away, because to a certain extent, I think the Biden people will be more accommodating and sympathetic to Europe, though the issues will still be there. So to a certain extent, what many people think was a positive movement of Europe to become more independent, more sovereign, will become a bit more complicated now to continue that thrust. I think Russia did have a special relationship with Trump, but the Russians always play the hand they have. I mean, they know these people. I mean, the KGB or the FSB today, they don't have to stay up all night writing, trying to discover what these new people think in Washington. They know. They can have a pretty good idea of what the response would be of these people to different issues. So the Russians, as I say, they are opportunistic and they will play the hand they're dealt, and for them, it's one half a dozen, one or the other, to be honest. I think I'll stop there because I think I've overrun my time already. I appreciate this, and I always like following Ambassador Dreyer because it shows the difference between Europeans and Americans. He takes high politics, high diplomacy. He talks about why we have light in the world, and I talk about who turns on the lights. So I always appreciate that juxtaposition of the two approaches to things. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ambassador Einik. I hope that in the Q&A session or in the discussions, we can also engage your different approaches to analyzing sort of high-low, switching on and off politics. That'll be nice. I will now invite Professor Roland Adjovi, who's going to speak with us a little bit about the United Nations and international law. Roland, if you can switch on your camera for when you talk, that would be excellent. We all get to see you.
Good evening, everyone. You can see me with the ceiling. I hope you don't mind. Just a correction, I have ceased to be professor at Acadia for about a few months. I'm now a legal expert for the United Nations a crime and drug department in West Africa, working on piracy, heading probably to Canada to teach in Canada next semester if things work well. What I want to do following the two ambassadors will be to look at what is going to change between the United Nations and the US, or between the US and its compliance with international law. The two are different, and I will explain why. The UN, I want to look at the international organization, so the institutional framework for cooperation, for international cooperation. International law, I want to look at the norms, how the US relates to those norms at different stage of the norms, but especially at the compliance stage. And to discuss that with a Biden administration, we need to recap what we had under Trump administration. And it will be a shortcut. It doesn't give a sufficient light, but I will try that. With the United Nations, I will say America first has been a policy of unilateralism, no consultation, going alone, and it has been difficult for the US to achieve what they want in the international arena. And there is no difficulty to see that. And in exchange, Russia, China, Turkey, other countries have taken advantage. And as I had said last time, African states felt better because it gives them a leeway to do whatever they want in their own strategy, not being forced to follow the US or the European together, a coalition against other countries. In terms of international law, it has been a defined a strategy negating the international norms, the recognition of Jerusalem or the settlement of the US Embassy in Jerusalem, blocking the international adjudication at the World Trade Organization, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, sanctioning ICC officials for the investigation in Afghanistan. So those are the things we have seen under Trump administration. Now, what is going to happen with Biden administration? In terms of the United Nations, Biden say the US is back. What does that mean? We are back to the pre-Trump administration stage, which is the US is going to re-engage again with the world, with within the international arena. It means they are going to play by the multilateral playbook. In principle, the US is going to cooperate better with other countries on common goals, and probably be more successful to reach the consensus around the ideas or the interests. This explains why the Secretary General of the United Nations was very happy about the election. It took him some time to make a statement because of the fear that things might not be totally settled yet. But once it was clear that Biden has won, he made a statement. What are the examples of how things could change? I will take the pandemic one. Right now, the US has threatened to leave a World Health Organization, wrote a letter and stop, defund the organization and so on. Probably Biden is going back into it, and Biden has a different strategy with the pandemic, and they are going to cooperate with the world for the vaccine, for the distribution of the vaccine, and for the cost as well, as much as he will be able to do. With the Human Rights Council, they will probably go back to the table, because being outside of the Human Rights Council doesn't help them to achieve their goal. So they need to be there to be able to deliver. However, in my view, there is one thing which is not going to change. And it's not only about the US. States use the United Nations to achieve their goal, to achieve their foreign policy objectives. And the US has done it throughout the years. They will do it again. And one major tool they have is the financial component. The US owes so much money to the UN, which they don't pay, and they use it as a bargaining tool, a strategic tool, to get what they want from the UN system. And I think that that is going to continue, and it's not going to change that much. As far as international law is concerned, going back to the table, I have a serious doubt, because US has a different way of looking at international law than most of the other countries, especially within the liberal world. The US has always considered international norms as they serve their purpose, as they serve its purpose, not as binding norms. There are tools for the US government to achieve what they are interested in, not tools which constrain the US administration in its operation. And there is nothing new with Trump. With Trump, it has been the same thing, except that he talks a lot of nonsense in international law. Previous administration will not talk, but will do it. I will take a simple example with the World Trade Organization. The current crisis we have with the impossibility of adjudication start under Obama administration. Obama administration blocked the adjudication mechanism, the dispute mechanism at the World Trade Organization, because they are losing so much in the litigations. They didn't try to comply with the rules. They didn't try to comply with the panel outcome. They tried to prevent the system from functioning. And that's what Trump has continued doing. Will Biden go back and let it function again? I seriously doubt that the US is going to go back as far as international norms are concerned. In fact, they will go back to one thing, hiding their plans and how they try to bend the rule and norms to serve their interests. So we'll go back to hide and seek, while with Trump, it's clear politics and he put everything on the table, even if he doesn't serve its interest. To conclude, in my thinking, Trump is on his way out, and I'm personally happy. I have lived in the US for 7 years throughout Trump administration, and I was tired, exhausted. But this might not change the world for most of its dysfunctional character, because the norms are there and the powerful states use them to force other states to do what serves their interests. The international organizations are there, and often states push them to the limit to prevent them from doing things which will be against their interests. That struggle is going to continue, and with the hope a better consensus will help us get somewhere most of the states and populations' interests are served. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, Roland. I think the order is just perfect. It's literally just rolling into the other teams. So I've already started getting questions. Feel free to start sending me the questions. Tell me who you are and who your question is for, and I'll keep compiling them for the end. At this point, I'm going to invite Professor Warren Haffar to talk about human rights as a necessary building block.
Everyone, thank you, Ruchi. And thank you, everyone. Roland, you're always a really tough act to follow, as well as the two ambassadors, Dreyer and Einik. What a stage. So happy to be here with you guys. And, you know, like most people around the world, I've been trying to understand the chaos of it all, right? And it is chaotic. Not just these elections, but as many speakers have already noted, the idea about what are the implications for all of this. So when I kind of, when Ruchi asked me to talk about human rights, I had a strong inclination to wanting to go back to basics and try and make sense of the chaos and figure out where we go from here. In my mind, my discipline is peace and conflict resolution, and I'm always trying to look for root causes, right? Like trying to understand where are the origins of conflict, what is it going to take if we aspire to conflict resolution and peace. What Ambassador Dreyer referred to is kind of this movement towards a harmonious world order. So in thinking about that, and in thinking about the charge and the discussion this evening, the role of human rights. What are they? What is their role? And in my kind of perspective in all of this, that human rights are one of the essential basic building blocks to building something better. And I actually kind of add the idea about the universality of human rights. So Roland alluded a little bit to the kind of way that the US has operated in the world. That is, it is kind of exceptional and universal rules apply to the United States when it's in our own best interest. And so when we talk about kind of going back to a multilateral playbook, that playbook has never really worked for us. So just want to spend a little bit of my time here talking about what human rights means and how it can be leveraged to get us to a much better world. But what it's going to mean is, I think, an end to US exceptionalism, which has been, I think, coming for a long time, but I think Trump has kind of accelerated this kind of backslide. With the pandemic loaded on top of it. So if I can just step back a little bit. So if we want to pivot here a little bit from human rights to a notion that's been around for a little while, to human security, right? So if we're looking at the basic structures, what motivates people, where do conflicts come from? We talk about human rights, we talk about human security. So everyone is kind of operating under very simple kind of rules of behavior. And my search has been to understand kind of what rules govern here. And in my mind, it's really about security. So we have human security. Mike Einik, you slipped in that term environmental security at one point, and I think there's a hierarchy of these things. One of the problems with the terminology of human security is that it's actually human-centric. So above that, if you're thinking about a hierarchy, would be global security. But fundamentally, the question is, what is the connective tissue here that connects all of the chaotic scenes that we're seeing? So whether it's the Black Lives Movement and calls for equity and equality across the globe, gender rights, what is influencing the rise of kind of right-wing nationalism, the kind of me first movement, so that, you know, make America great again, and the other countries that are kind of jumping on that. And this is not even to add kind of climate-induced migration that is happening, right? So people are being motivated en masse by very simple rules, and that's to secure basic needs. So for psychologists in the group, you might think back to Maslow's hierarchy of trying to secure the basic things that we as a species and living entities need to survive, right? So if that's the connective tissue, then we're talking about some unstoppable forces with this power and this movement for people to secure better lives for themselves and their family. So I'm just saying where my time is here. So if we look at the convergence of all of the things that are imposing demands for change, and again, these have been building for a long time. Inequality is not new. They all converge here, and the global pandemic is exacerbating this thing. And what I suspect is that the distribution of the vaccines is going to highlight the inability of the global order to effectively address global needs, right? And so these are things that are really punctuating it. So the Biden administration, I certainly kind of welcome the team that brought into place, embracing multilateralism, embracing diplomacy. Great news for the students out there in the IPCR program, as well as at AGS. But this is actually a Band-Aid to much more work that needs to be done, which is going to inevitably lead, in my opinion, to a need to strengthen international organizations. The scale of the problems that are coming at us are really problems that individual states can no longer effectively deal with. Nor can regional organizations effectively deal with them. So I think it's going to take a little while, but I think our evolutionary path is set a little bit. And a reduction and hopefully a collapse of US exceptionalism has kind of dwarfed some of these efforts to build a more just and equitable world order. So I'm hopeful here. I'm hopeful that a weakening of the US, and I think the pandemic has exposed the fallacy of the US economic system and this powerhouse, to say that, you know, we have the best healthcare in the United States, we have the best of everything. In fact, we don't. And this is just been put in striking contrast. I mean, the numbers of deaths and infections in the United States is off the charts. And you only need to kind of look at it deeper to see that we've got a real structural problem here that has global implications. So I think US capitalism needs to be significantly tempered. And I'm looking forward to, I think Biden has a lot of work to do just to get us back to where we left off, but we do not want to park ourselves there. There's a lot more that needs to be done, and there are whole sections of the globe that have been kind of out in the cold for a long time, and hoping that we can move to something much better. So I think I will leave it there, and hope we can pick some more of these themes up in the conversation.
Great, thank you very much, Warren. I will have Professor Douglas Yates follow you with a discussion on democracy and constitutionalism. Douglas, you're muted in case you haven't seen that.
There we go. So I'm sticking to the 8-minute schedule. I think it's a wonderful thing for democracy that Donald Trump has been defeated, and not just American democracy, but democratic activists everywhere. And democracy, I think we've all learned, is not a static, fixed state, but a process that we have to continually struggle for. I think this is a nice moment, since we're in a program of international relations, to recall Thucydides. One of the most famous passages is the funeral oration speech of Thucydides, when the Athenians first start to bury their dead in a war that's going to destroy Athens. Pericles tries to make them understand what they're fighting for. And in this speech, he says, "We live under a form of government which does not emulate the institutions of our neighbors. On the contrary, we are ourselves a model which some follow, rather than the imitators of other peoples. It is true that our government is called a democracy because its administration is in the hands not of the few, but of the many." He goes on to explain what he thinks constitutes the Athenian democracy. And because I'm going to stay to my limit, I'm not going to use all of the time to read that speech. But what happened to Athens was Pericles died, and his successors weren't great men. Pericles is presented to us as a great leader, And great democracy requires great leaders. And so after Pericles died of the plague in Athens, he was a victim of the plague. Interestingly enough, a COVID-like incident triggered Pericles' death and the destruction of Athens, from which it would really never recover. And Thucydides writes a little later, and so Athens, though in name a democracy, gradually became in fact a government ruled by its foremost citizens. And from this, since it happened in a great and imperial state, there resulted many blunders, especially the Sicilian expedition, because striving each to be first, the men who succeeded Pericles were ready to surrender to the people, even the conduct of public affairs, to suit their whims. The point that Thucydides is making is democracy is not populism. Democracy is not pandering to the lowest common denominator. Democracy is a deliberative form that requires good leadership and which then can harness the justice and the fairness of a rule by the many. The men who replaced Pericles, the Greeks had a word for it. It was demagogue. And a demagogue is not a democrat. In fact, from their point of view, demagoguery was the next stage of decline. The ancients believed that the history of a state was cyclical. You have a monarch, then you have an aristocracy, then you have a democracy, and then you have ochlocracy, mob rule. What Trump represented to democracy is what a disease like COVID or the plague represents to the human body. Diogenes Laertius, who was citing his namesake, Diogenes the dog, the founder of cynicism, said that Diogenes used to call the demagogues the lackeys of the people. What he meant was that they don't actually rule. They follow. They follow the whims of the people. And without leadership, Athens declined. Therefore, what's going to be the effect of removing Donald Trump? It's the possibility to maintain ourselves in a democratic system of government, and nothing less than that. Constitutionalism, the other word in this 5-minute segment, refers to not the existence of a written constitution, but the belief in the rule of law, as opposed to the rule of men. Demagoguery does not support constitutionalism. Demagoguery is about the rule of men. And for the 71 million people, for whatever reason, they voted in support of Donald Trump, they pushed us near the precipice of the rule of man. I don't know if Biden will be a good president, but I know he'll be a better president, and that the values that he represents are more important than his party or his policies or his person. Antiquity didn't have a lot of democracies. After Athens went and Greece was conquered by Rome, you didn't have any more democracies. But there was still the battle between a republic and an empire. And if one thing Biden does represent, whether or not it's democratic, is he represents a republic. And that's a model that we need to maintain.
Great, thank you very much, Douglas. You are bang on time, I believe. Let me see. Yeah, you're well within the time. Thank you very much, Douglas. We're going to move on to Professor Mariam Habibi, who will talk about nuclear proliferation in the Biden presidency, or the switch.
So I'm putting my timer on, so I'll try and stay and not go over. Basically the theme or the title that Professor Anand gave me. My first question, I mean, she did say no regions, but in many ways I feel as soon as the word proliferation goes out there, everybody sees Iran. So I'll try and speak as little as possible about Iran, but I do think that the liberal world order, which is the theme of today's talk, is to a large extent in many ways at risk, and it is at risk for a number of reasons, but the proliferation, the nuclear question is obviously something that is raising the stakes really high. So just to put it in the context, the first thing I would say, if I put the word proliferation next to the liberal world order, basically I think the non-proliferation treaty comes to mind, and I'm pretty sure that's what Professor Anand was referring to. So just a tiny bit of reminder, so this is a treaty that 191 countries had signed, including Iran, and this was signed back in 1968, which is right in the heat of the Cold War, and it was a way to deter the escalation and stuff like that. So just to remind you also that that treaty gave an agency, the Atomic Energy Agency, the right to check and make sure that countries are not moving towards weapons. Another thing that's important to say is that in that treaty, actually promoting nuclear for peaceful purposes was completely accepted. In other words, it wasn't a question of no nuclear, it was a question of not moving towards the weapons. Now, coming back again to the, sorry, one other thing to say about this treaty: 4 countries did not sign it. And it's interesting that of these 4 countries, so originally when the treaty was put out there, 5 countries were said to be recognized as countries that were allowed to have nuclear weapons, but 4 countries that didn't sign it, 3 of the 4 happened to also have, by some means, nuclear weapons. So that's India, Pakistan, and Israel. So just put that on the shelf till we get back to the notion of the liberal world order. I actually think and I hope I am being a pessimist. In other words, I would like to have others tell me that this isn't the case, but I really feel right now we're living at a time when that liberal world order in relation to the nuclear is really I mean, it is dangerous. In other words, we're living, I think, through extremely dangerous times when that world order could actually be, at the moment, at risk. So in terms of understanding, I mean, obviously the liberal world order, the idea is to maintain after World War II a certain amount of stability, but I would say in that stability, a certain degree of sort of standards were also supposed to have been out there and respected. And some of these standards, Professor Yates just referred to it when he talks about constitutionalism, which is not it is the rule of man and not the rule of, sorry, it is the rule of law and not the rule of man. That's one standard. Another standard is also the kind of, I would even say, the vocabulary that is used out there. In other words, when we have, and this is what we've had in recent years, and this is where I'll bring Iran in, just labels such as, you know, just because Iran is not a normal country, then these rules can apply to Iran, even if, you know, the world order accepts certain measures, and I think even Iran, a lot of people in Iran accept certain measures. It has also, I think that's where the risk and the danger is. It has reached a time when one wonders if no standards are kept, and if it is more the rule of man rather than the rule of law, what is really, if the liberal world order still exists. In other words, does it apply to every single country the way it was originally supposed to? Just to sort of go back a tiny bit of history, saying that indeed the tension that I am so concerned about right now, it's something that dates back in 2002, I believe that President Bush mentioned the weapons of mass destruction, not in relation to Iraq, but in fact in relation to Iran. However, given that the war in Iraq started, basically for a while people looked the other way from what was happening to Iran, but soon the pressure was put. In other words, the pressure was put because there was fear of, right or wrong, I have no idea, but there was fear of that this uranium enrichment would actually, could give Iran the potential of having a weapon. And the pressure, I think it's worth also talking about the tactics that were used. On the one hand, sanctions, it's something that's been crippling the country with the intention of crippling, but also trying to bring about a change in the behavior of the government. I think they've managed in the first one, but not in the second one. But the tactics, we also have to add, cyber attacks, and thirdly, assassinations, which brings me to today. As you know, about a week ago, we had the third assassination in the list of scientists who'd been assassinated in Iran. So this, in some ways, again brings me back to that notion of the liberal world order. We are also in a situation where certain tactics are used. The objectives are the same. The objectives are to put pressure on the country that the world feels that is not pursuing, or it is pursuing a dangerous line in the direction of weapons. But when you think of the tactics that are being permitted, one, at least from where I'm looking at it, does wonder, where this world liberal order is taking us. So quickly, just to get to more or less what's happening today. So in other words, as Professor Anand said, to link it to Biden, the new administration. Yes, I think everybody knows that President Biden has said that he would bring about go back to the negotiating table. But something you should also know, that right now in Iran, especially since the assassination, I think is a very important and a very dangerous, I repeat, a very dangerous thing that's happened. You basically do have this division where you've got parliament that's pushing for, refusing, in fact, to allow anybody from the agency to come back, and therefore taking a very hard line. On the other hand, you've got the government that's trying to say that what the parliament has done is illegal. For the moment, the Supreme Leader hasn't taken a position, but clearly when he talks, that will be very extremely important. From the point of view of the other actors, the Europeans are trying very hard. December 16th, they're going to be meeting in Vienna. They're going to be meeting in Vienna in order to put forward a roadmap for Iran. I think from the European point of view, they're trying to sort of anticipate or take action that would give the new Biden administration, open the door, I would say, to the Biden administration. On the other hand, I think what is left of the Trump administration, plus other countries that are hostile to Iran, and also I think keen on, unfortunately, on maybe seeing a very sort of violent outcome. They're pushing, I would say, to try and make the Biden administration, put Biden administration in a situation where nothing can be done. In other words, if Iran reacts to these these provocations, then we assume that President Biden wouldn't really have a foot to stand on to be able to negotiate. So sorry if I spoke more about Iran than I should have done. 9 minutes, 38 seconds. I'll stop there.
Perfect, right on, Mariam. Perfect timing, right before the 10-minute mark. And like you said, I mean, there's no way to avoid talking about Iran if you're being asked to talk about nuclear proliferation. At this point, let's make the switch. Let's go over to news impacts truths. So that'll be Professor Joav Toker about media, news, information. News impacts truths. Over to you, Joav.
Yes, I should have sound right. Thank you, Ruchi. Yes, of course, I couldn't avoid, just as I was listening, these interesting interventions over the last hour or so. I just couldn't avoid sort of an automatic type of diagnosis, which I've already have built in my listening system and thinking system, which is that practically every single intervention up to now sort of fed me with clear or somehow indirect indications of what I'm supposed to talk about, right? I chose to title my intervention as news, nothing really new per se, when there is a change from Trump to Biden. Impacts, once again, it's somehow more nuanced in terms of communication when we know what kind of techniques and insistence were invested in the way Trump had handled his so-called communication strategy and tactics. And truth, actually truths, in brackets, as of course allusion to the fact that there is not necessarily a truth, but yes, we're speaking about truths in plural, which is honestly a great contribution, cynically, to a lot of our vocabulary and common sense and ethics, in which I think, and this time perspective would not change a lot from now, from what we see now and what we may see in 25 years from now. In this, the Trump administration indeed had contributed in a very perverse way to this multiplication of relevant truths that we should keep in mind. Let us be diplomats or communicators or citizens heading towards their a polling station, right? This is really new and worrisome, of course, and we just start to perhaps, we have perceived it very early into the Trump administration, actually into the Trump campaign over 2015 to 16, but we haven't realized how far it might go, and now we are for sure on that. And actually the very present chapter we're crossing, which is that of the post-electoral and pre-inauguration day, which Trump performs, is actually doing even better, namely worse, in this fabrication of alternative truths and denial of truths and classification of different fragments of a given truth, so they can match other elements which would have perhaps some dosage of truth, but it would be administered under a different set of values and set of geography, right? The geography of truth. This is frightening, obviously, but this is what we're going through, right? Now, the question, the most important question seems to me right now is, to what extent is the fact that we're gonna have a new president, the world is gonna have a new president in about 44 days, would change something substantial about that. So we won't have in office, in operation, a president which practices alternative truths. I believe, I hope, I'm pretty sure. But what is going to disappear due to the fact that the most powerful single individual on earth may do in terms of the impacts of what he's doing well beyond US borders, of course, due to the fact that he's not going to be in office, as he had invested the international scene and US internal scene with those extremely dangerous elements. Now, I have to nuance here and be intellectually honest. Trump had not invented those things, and this also found echoes in some of the other interventions. Some of the things we were so worried about, and we're still perplexed about, Trump indeed innovated. Here, he did not completely innovate. He had just accelerated the manipulation of truths, and he had almost, unknowingly certainly, conceptualized on it. Not voluntarily, but I mean, the conceptualization is what we are doing. I mean, the scholars are doing, or commentators are doing, right? Little by little, we are conceptualizing with some question marks as to what actually is he doing, and what is the sense of the strategy, perhaps, and tactics for sure, for saying blue rather than green and red rather than yellow, etc., etc. Of course, once again, these are elements that we may attribute, to do it fast, to the sort of reality show domain in which, of course, from which indeed Trump rose to prominence and to and actually paved his way to the White House. This is certainly the single most important element on his curriculum vitae, which brought him to power, well more so than his career as a businessman or a real estate figure or tycoon, or somehow colorful figure, right? So what Trump had brought is, of course, an extraordinary sense of acceleration of that, and new elements in this so-called conceptualization of what do you do about truth. And truth goes well beyond the traditional debate in communication and media studies and all that, as to, are we sure the news we are being delivered with are the truthful one, are the correct ones, are the exact ones, are the ones which had been properly checked and cross-checked. So what we read in the paper, what we see being posted on social media, and what we watch on television is actually the way things happened, namely truth, right? Trump had really upgraded those domains in the way he behaved constantly. And I'm not sure, I'm actually sure we do not figure out the scope of these damages. Now, will those disappear as time goes on, as healing in this domain is obviously going to arrive once the new administration enters office? Yes, there will be an attenuation of that. Will those further accelerations and new conceptualizations will necessarily heal things? I'll be more cautious about it. I'm not sure, not because I'm afraid that the Biden administration will copy or imitate some of the techniques and the tactics that Trump had used, but just because of what I suspect to be sort of medium and long run impacts of constant, daily, detailed, numerous investments in non-truths, or truths about which we have difficulties in decoding the real and unreal, the imagined and undenied elements. They do not disappear in the minds of consumers. And let consumers be elected voters, let them be professional politicians, let them be diplomats, let them be political leaders. Mind you, Trump is not completely original on word scene. and many of the elements he had put into action during these 4 years of office, right? I actually believe that the prominent moment in this process, in this phenomena, actually dates back at least to the Brexit electoral campaign, referendum, which is 2-3 years before Trump arrived. And of course, there are earlier cases, but not as prominent, taking place in countries which do not play such an important role in the international world order, such as the US or Britain. But look these days at Brazil, at Turkey, in Moscow, in China in a different way, although it's not precisely what we're talking about in terms of the liberal world order. So Trump will stay with us in the domain I'm trying to pull some elements for thinking about, and the disappearance of his presence would be not as rapid as the disappearance of some of his foreign policy initiatives or legislative initiatives internally in the US, and the sense of serenity which we all hope will re-arrive in American national life and therefore in international life. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joav. You actually timed your presentation. Tiffany just typed 10 minutes and you were there. Very well. Thank you, everyone, for your talks. And now I guess I'll invite myself to say a few words. I'll try to keep it really short on sort of, I guess, the environmental politics. I titled it Not America First, but Planet First. It's interesting, as you all were talking, I was thinking it's the most crucial of all the topics that sort of draw a string between each one of the terms, concepts, and issues that you all raised, be it world order or diplomacy or human rights or democracy or nuclear proliferation or the media. It seems to me that the environmental issues really are at the heart of where we are at. And here I'm not talking about where we are at politically. I do want to emphasize, although it's no surprise to anyone, but the environment is in peril, the earth is in peril, and it's been in peril longer than Mr. Trump came to power, and will probably be dealing with issues long after Biden leaves. I love one of these, a quote by Wendell Berry: "The earth is what we all have in common." And if we were to play with that, the obvious thing that we want to ask is, how do we recognize the problem? The first step in any kind of policy making is problem recognition. How do we recognize it, or do we recognize it? How do we go about defining the problem? And then ultimately, how do we put things in place to solve the problem? And I think that's probably a huge, and I think that's probably where my optimism lies, a shift from the Trump presidency to the Biden presidency, of how they frame the problem, or more so just simply how they accept the existence of the problem. Biden says, well, it's an issue, it's a #1 issue facing humanity, whereas Trump says it's an anti-growth agenda. And I think right there we have an interesting sort of take on the politics of their two presidencies or their action plans. And here I'm really simply talking about how a 76-year-old Biden versus a 70 how many ever years old Trump just simply embrace the problem. And then of course the environment is a very complex issue. We're dealing with, and this is what I use in my class, like 5 circles. You have the scientific aspects, the political aspects, the economic aspects, the legal aspects, and then ultimately the philosophical aspects. So I know we're getting into a big chunk, but I think what we've seen with transition to the Biden presidency from the Trump is perhaps, as Niklas Hohn of the New Climate Institute of Germany says, well, literally what we're seeing is a shift from America first to planet first. Whether or not this is going to prove to be successful, 4 years is too short. We know how American politics works and how world politics works. It's probably not going to show results right off, but what we know is that we are seeing a shift from a presidency that totally belittled the idea of any kind of environmentalist. And I just have to read out real fast a few silly quotes from Trump. I'm an environmentalist. A lot of people don't understand that. I think I know the environment more than anyone else. climate change is a very expensive hoax. I don't believe in climate change. The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make US manufacturing non-competitive. There's a cooling and there's a heating. People are flushing toilets 10 times. I don't think that what we're leaving behind, and I have no nostalgia about that, is a presidency that literally lacks any sort of respect or legitimacy for an issue that literally is, I think, the most crucial that we're dealing with. We should be able to reach a point, of course, where we don't need to protect the environment, but where we would be able to, through the various tools, institutional and diplomatic tools, be able to create a world where the environment, in fact, doesn't need protection, because that is the only home we have. So I think we see a huge change from America first to planet first. So a quick contrast, and I know the laundry list is long, but just simply I'll go through like Trump versus Biden on, you know, opening the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil exploitation versus protecting it from development, favoring Keystone XL pipelines and the Dakota Access Pipeline, and then with Biden coming and saying, no, we're going to try our best. Again, like I said, whether or not it happens is another story, but we are seeing something put in place for it. Trump supported an unobstructed growth for fossil fuel industry, whereas I think Biden is sort of more modest about that. In terms of oil regulation, we know that Trump rolled back the Obama rules for halting methane leaks, etc. And then we're seeing Biden kind of hoping to crack down on that. Big one, Trump supporting fracking, which in my opinion is sort of really the future of, like, we're digging a hole in the supporting wall of your home, planet Earth, versus Biden, whether or not he gets it. Again, I'm, you know, optimistic, very optimistic just by the tone, but perhaps not so much yet by what's in place. So fracking, the Paris Agreement, nuclear energy issues, name it, you name it, water, plastic, endangered species. I think Trump did more damage than any other president that we've seen on the face of at least my lifetime, but I believe everyone's lifetimes. He's rolled back about 125 environmental agreements and totally made them redundant and literally sort of a matter of ridicule. The second point I want to raise is sort of like the issue, which I think already came up. Ambassador Einik raised that the emphasis of the environment as a national security issue. I like that. That's what appeals to policymakers. That's what appeals to politicians. And I like that, in fact, the Biden administration has sort of this newly created position of the special presidency envoy to climate as part of the National Security Council. And I think that is huge. I think that's the first time ever, and that is huge, dedicated to climate change, reflecting the president-elect's commitment to addressing climate change as a, quote, urgent national security issue. Love it. I mean, I think that no other president sort of has had the courage to do something, however controversial. Maybe it's a function of his age, but I find sort of even a lot of his cabinet picks and diverting from earlier norms very refreshing. And then I'm seeing the time ticking, but I will try to squeeze this in. And I do believe that leadership is a big, huge part to all of this, where we've had the Paris mayor and Hildal and many others say, welcome back, America. We know that in response to COVID, in response to pretty much all of the climate change work that the rest of the countries are doing, America has stepped back and has become not only sort of a missing figure, but has become sort of the epitome of ridicule with a president who didn't represent the ideals that I think the world's largest democracy stands for. So I think that's been a big move to be able to bring in leadership. And when I say leadership here, I'm talking about undoubtedly the 76-year-old Kerry, who has a lot of experience as a career diplomat, also helped negotiate the Kyoto Protocol, a lot of experience there, was the key architect of the Paris Climate Accord. Really, there's nothing compared to what we've seen in the past, where we've had two EPA chiefs, I'm talking Scott Pruitt and Andrew Wheeler, who were basically puppets in the hands of the EPA, but really they're energy lobbyists. who fought several cases against environmental advocates. So it's a refreshing change. Again, people make a difference, and I like to hold on to the optimism that we are on to something that would, at least in 4 years, do something. And then lastly, the United States being back on the world stage. After 4 years of sitting on the sideline, the US will finally have a representative on the world stage, understand the gravity of what the climate crisis is. And the climate crisis, like I said, is related to so many other things, including refugees and movements and immigration and emigration, and of course the economy. So hopefully the divided Congress wouldn't limit Biden's efforts as they stand on paper, but it seems to me that we are actually moving into an era where we are concerned as a collective to do whatever we call the liberal international world order by putting into place a common theme. And the common theme, I can't see anything better than the Earth, planet Earth. So I will stop here, and I will quickly switch hat and check my chat to see if there aren't any new questions. I do have a list. I'll pull that up. Douglas, you seem to be talking. Are you trying to say something to me, or? He's probably just on a chat. All right, so well, thank you all very, very much for setting the stage for, I think, a brilliant discussion to follow. And I'm just gonna, if you give me a minute, pick up my page with the questions that I have here. All righty. Is Douglas talking to us? I'm not sure. Maybe not. Okay. All right. So I guess the panel's right here. I have one question, and please feel free to send questions, and you can send it to everyone. Where you can go ahead and send it to. I have two lined up. The first one is for Ambassador Dreyer. This question comes from Ravan, who's asking if the international order is moving from a multipolarity, if it's moving towards multipolarity, and if we're seeing the end of unipolarity with the US sort of stepping back. And then the follow-up question is a multipolar world where I think, you all raised Russia, China, the rise of other powers, if that's a more dangerous one than the unipolar world. So I'll leave Ambassador Dreyer, and then of course the rest of us can join that. You're muted, Ambassador Dreyer. Dominique?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, when we have to talk about the future, I'm always very cautious. I think there was this American who said once, never make predictions, especially about the future. And I think this is very true. But what is actually quite clear is that the emergence of China is, of course, somehow bringing the world to, I would say, again, to a kind of bipolar kind of situation, like we had the Soviet Union and US, who were the two poles of the Cold War. But this new bipolarity of China and US is not based on ideology, but is based basically on economic factors and technology, and maybe also on political rivalry. And I think the world is probably, I do not think that China is able to impose its present ideology. I am somehow convinced that, of course, the way China is developing is also going to cause a number of crises with the rest of the world. And somehow China is becoming a kind of state enterprise, closely controlled by the Communist Party. So everything will be more or less in the hands of a very small elite. I mean, especially the economic power of China. And this, of course, in a world that is supposed to be ruled by a liberal economy, by the market, by the forces of the market, and not by the forces of the state. This, of course, is a kind of contradiction which will make the living with China more difficult. And China is supposed to, or says that they will develop market economy and that they will develop a system, economic system, which is much less dependent on state economy. But the problem with China, with the centralization of power within the hands of a small organization called the Central Committee and the Politburo of the Communist Party, with this kind of system, the whole economic system of China will be really very much controlled by the party. And this is a situation that I think the liberal world will find more difficult to live with. But I think there will be certainly a competition between the two and between the two big powers. I don't think it will be worse than before. And I think we have to live with it, whether we want it or not.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to actually add in a word there because I think that's a really interesting, at least theoretical question. If I may, I mean, is the international order moving to multipolarity? So I think I would totally answer that question with yes, particularly after the 4 years of Trump. Because while I guess the US was in standstill trying to figure out what the hell happened to an institution that was so respected, the rest of the world kind of were doing things. So I really think that China perhaps is a potential contender, and in the Carnegie Endowment, they put out a lot of stuff talking about like the balance of power shift to Asia, China rising. But I think the big question to ask is, does China really want to be balancing any power? Because I think, like you mentioned, Ambassador Dreyer, like they're really focused on their economic betterment rather than trying to balance politically in any way. They're chugging ahead with whatever they need to do, whether it means scrambling for Africa and taking all the deals, or dealing with the aftermath of COVID and laughing up at the United States for the mess they've made. But I'm not sure that they've ever aspired to being a balancer. And so, I mean, I wouldn't call it a unipolar world for sure. I think that is passé, if ever it was true, because I think it was more of a multipolarity. But
wait, yeah.
The panelists, anyone want to jump in on that question? You're more than welcome.
Well, I'll just add here. I think that every state has its ambitions. So we're definitely in this era of kind of bipolarity, and moving then to the kind of single pole with the United States. All the while, states have been trying. Other states, Brazil, African countries, are all trying to catch up, and I think that's kind of some kind of inevitable evolution of the nation states that are around. So when I was talking about simple rules, I think everyone's kind of following the same playbook. They're trying to kind of acquire and secure as much as they possibly can. So I do think that we're going into a period of time where, with the United States stepping back, other countries are then allowed to kind of improve themselves. So many countries have been kind of hindered in their growth because of the exploitation from these powerful countries, right? The United States leading among them. So hopefully we can go down a path where exploitation is lessened. And this was my call to kind of strengthen international organizations, because I think that's what it's going to take.
Can I inject something?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly a very, very critical question. And it's something I've been wondering when Juan was talking about the end of American exceptionalism. We always see this, or seem to define this in the context of this exceptionalism being lost to America, being wrestled away from it and given to someone else. But is that necessarily the way it has to be? I mean, couldn't this end of exceptionalism be the beginning of a different organization, well, a different balance in the world? Yeah. We always seem to sort of define it as something that's being lost to the U.S. or is being taken away from it. And I'm not sure that that is necessarily the way that we need to look at it in that context. And again, when we talk about a multipolarity world, you know, is there some referee who tells us that's happened? I mean, when do we know that happens? What is the impact of that actually happening? I mean, does the U.S. know that it's happened to it? So, I mean, all of these questions basically are interesting in theory, but I often wonder, what are the practical implications of all of this? What does it really mean when we say this?
Mm-hmm. And just a question that actually links to what we're talking about. So I'll just throw it on the floor and then open it further. That's from Fazola. She's an AGS alum. She's asking, Putin received a question, will Russia and China create a military alliance? Putin said, well, it's possible due to the high levels of commonality and diplomacy they have. Will the West try to prevent such an alliance? So I don't know, anyone else want to jump in, but this is something that definitely interests me from, like, you know, I know Ambassador Einik, you say, well, when will we know it's happened? And I think that, well, of course, there aren't like numbers that say, oh, well, it's happened, but we knew all throughout the Cold War that it was a bipolar world. There was really no stats or proof or anything needed. We knew that all the different problems and disputes and resolutions happened in that bipolar axis. And it seems to me that, you know, Russia and China, both also being important members of the Security Council, are going to perhaps be able to form this coalition. So I'll throw it back at you with the second question. Not just China, would it be like a Russia-China thing, or would it be a BRICS thing? But we know that with the diminishing, perhaps, power, political and world leadership power of the United States, because the last 4 years have really taken away. I mean, any kind of polls have shown that, you know, internationals are sort of looking at the US with less respect, with less awe, with less envy. In fact, lessons that we're learning from them is more about what not to do. So we see that happening, but do we see a Russia-China coalition perhaps creating a military alliance? And that's an important one. So that's from Fazola. Will the West try to prevent such an alliance?
I have to say, I have trouble seeing an alliance. I mean, an alliance is a very formal mechanism between two countries. And a military alliance in particular, when the Russians and Chinese are facing off across a very long border, which is contested in some areas, where even Russian sovereignty in some of the Far East areas are being threatened by Chinese incursions of population. So, I mean, I could see Putin saying that, because he'll say anything that makes it difficult, that, you know, troubles the West and forces it to respond in some way. But a military alliance is something that I would see as quite unlikely, given the nature of what an alliance actually is.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. I mean, military alliance between Russia and China is out of the question. And close alliance between India and Russia, I think also is certainly not possible, because India, I mean, is so different from Russia. There has been a kind of very, well, Ruchi, you know more about it than I do, of course, but I mean, India was very close to Russia, to the Soviet Union for many years, and I don't think this was necessarily in favor of India. So I don't think that one should see things in terms of military alliances. I would say it's more a question of political influence. And,
right. I mean, I'm more
can I have
oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I will ask Ruchi if I could have a leave of 15 minutes.
Yes, you may.
I'll be back on 15 minutes anyway.
5 o'clock, you're back at 8 o'clock, Dominique. I'm kidding.
I'll be back at 8 o'clock, yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I just wanted to say, I mean, the Turks buying Russian military equipment troubles me more than the prospect of a Russia-Chinese military alliance, to be honest.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, how do you actually define alliance? And I mean, I don't see a military alliance, but I just threw that question out there because it was a balance of power type of question. I think to sort of fuel the discussion, there's a question, and a very interesting one from Edgardo, basically saying Trump was a symptom. He wasn't really the cause of all that we've seen. Populism is rising. Populism has been sort of taking root in, India, Poland, Brazil, of course, with Brexit and stuff. Is this the end or the beginning of the difficult times? So obviously Biden is inheriting a lot from the legacy of the last 4 years, not just Trump's legacy, but the legacy of international events as they've unfolded. Is this the end of the beginning of a difficult time in terms of perhaps, and I'm just putting words in your mouth, Edgardo, but like sort of like the globalized outside, oh, we're back. So now the US can be like a world leader in the liberal international world versus, wait a minute, we, don't really need the collective. We don't need the international, and the countries are actually branching out back into state level, internal populist politics that perhaps don't even care about the global as much as they do the local or the national. So I'll just throw that at you. This is from Edgardo. And feel free to unmute yourself, Edgardo, and join in the discussion. You're not a spectator. So if anyone wants to, Douglas, you look like you're getting ready to say something.
Yeah, well, I wanted to be careful because I'm not seeing the whole mosaic, and I don't know if other people are waiting quietly, but Edgardo's question is very pertinent, and it's one of the reasons that I believe Donald Trump's defeat is not only good news for American democracy, but is good news for global democracy. Because I think the United States, since the end of World War II, has had a unique role in not trying to impose democracy, although that's what it was during the Cold War. But since the end of the Cold War, trying to be a model of democracy. And I think that if democracy looks like something that doesn't work, that makes the rich richer and the poor poorer, that leads to deindustrialization and homelessness and, disease and sickness. If the things that are associated with democracy are bad in the United States, then it's not such a great argument. But when you examine the argument that the opposite of democracy is good, and that's of course what China represents, the authoritarian model of development, the kinds of critiques we lay against democracy can be weighed just as heavily against authoritarianism.
I guess here I'm going to jump in and interrupt or perhaps steer the discussion, because I've been really struggling with the term democracy. And what we're calling American democracy might, at least the way it played out in these elections and, the way the electoral system is, I'm not certain that, people in France would think that that's the epitome of like democracy. So I think within democracy, it's so important to make even those distinctions, which perhaps further divides sort of what we're calling like the democratic world versus like the guys who do it differently. I don't know, and you're the person who does, like, you're the comparativist, I guess, in a sense. And I really have a hard time even saying the term democracy, because I'm not certain, and I know this is a very Schnatzsider elitist argument, but like, is democracy really truly the best form of government if the people voting are not informed? And here's where I guess Professor Toker's area of specialization comes in, where in fact they're just soaking in what the media is telling them for knowing what they should vote for, and at the end of it you have like that many African Americans, that many women voting against their own interests. So I don't know, I guess just wanted to also throw this in the burner.
Can I just throw an additional question out to Douglas as he gets to respond to this? What, if any, impact would ex-President Trump in opposition who's an active candidate for 2024, what impact might that individual who has a large following have on populism around the world? I mean, we haven't really discussed what impact a post-Trump interregnum, let's say, would have on some of these issues. But Douglas, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so there's two different thrusts here. They're related. One, which is Ruchi's question, is what exactly do we mean by democracy? And the other is this distinction that I think is that Trump has given us an object lesson in, which is the difference between democracy and populism, which resembles democracy the way that poisoned lures resemble good food to animals that you want to kill. So as for what democracy is, we need a thick definition of democracy. So the famous thin definitions of democracy are systems where the leaders are elected in fair and free elections, and it's far too minimalist. Democracy means having a free media. It means having rule of law. It means having functioning courts. It means having an effective administrative apparatus to provide goods and services.
So would you classify the U.S. as a
protection
democracy?
It means protection of human rights. It refers to hundreds of different institutions, and including a lot of informal rules, what Tocqueville called habits of the heart. Like if we're in a group, we naturally form a line instead of everyone pushing to the front and cheating. That's democracy too. And so the United States and every country like France, if you imagine them with like 300 some odd factors, none of them come in all 300, even Norway and Sweden don't. And so there's some areas where the United States has been positively undemocratic since the beginning, but it had a preponderance of good democratic scores. And that allowed it to, with its great power, economic and military, become a model. But it's never actually been the best functioning democracy. And therefore, now this is related to Mike's question, which is what's the effect of someone like Trump? Every time, instead of giving your kids nutritious food, you give them junk food, you make them sick. And populism is like junk food. Democracy is the nutritious food that makes your political life better. And populism is the junk food that makes your life sicker. And so Trump is kind of supersizing us and making us sick. So he can do that even better, that is, deliver his poison from the opposition, because his particular poison is a kind of grievance populism. However, from inside the organs of state, that was like having vital organs being poisoned. So there's ways that a state, democratic or not, can deal with opposition, populist opposition leaders. France, for example, has been controlling its national front with a Republican coalition, as they speak of it here. And so the United States has enough tools to kind of place a cap and turn Donald Trump into Ross Perot. But the danger that Trump is, his version of populism represents won't go away. And therefore, the real solution is to improve aspects of our democracy. And some of them require some institutional changes, which we're not able to make in ways, but others don't require very much, but to reverse the changes that he's implemented and get back on the track that we were on before. So there's been a great deal of policy making behind the circus and spectacle of Donald Trump. And those things are really nefarious. So for example, what would make the United States, and I'm going to try to be quick here, what would make the United States more attractive, its democracy more attractive than China, would be a flourishing, successful economy. And what Trump has done to the economy is ruin it, unadulterated. There's been no growth. This has been borrowing from our grandchildren, trillions of dollars, and pumping it into an asset bubble. on Wall Street and property values and a complete deindustrialization. So if we can actually improve our economy, our democracy will be better. Aspects right now of treating the poor, empowering minority groups, protecting the environment, regulating Wall Street, implementing actual taxation of the 1% and of corporate America in order to recreate our infrastructure, provide jobs, provide education. So one of the, often the relationship between economics and democracy is that we think that democracy promotes capitalism. And that was the argument during the Cold War. But one of the ways that we can make democracy more attractive is if we show a little economic leg. And so far, the elites in America have very openly sold out the American economy, offshoring all their money, not paying any of their taxes, delocalizing jobs, polluting the environment, and feeding us crap. So regulating the marketplace is the last big democratic progress we had were after the Great Depression and during the 1960s. And that's when we got involved in regulating capitalism and seeing the sellout Congress and the, just a bought and paid for federal government has, we've got to get the money out.
Yeah. So I'm gonna, thank you, Douglas. I'm gonna go back to Edgardo, so you'll unmute yourself. I'm gonna quote you, Douglas. Populism is a junk food. And I can give you a good fight on that. And democracy makes your lives better. So like, Edgardo, going with the comment or your question that you asked, like, is it really just a symptom or is it the root cause? What's going to happen to the future of populism? Did you want to sort of jump in here a little bit?
It's just that coming from America and seeing that 74 million people still voted for Trump, and seeing how divided America is, and seeing the populism rise in other parts of the world, I don't think that we're past it. I really don't. I think it's just the beginning, and I think I'm an optimist by nature. I think things will get better, but here I think I have to be very honest and say that I think things are going to get worse before things get better, unfortunately.
All right, so I'm gonna, unless y'all want to work with that more, there's another question that I get from Ariana. She's saying, with Biden's administration appearing to be more inclusive, and Warren, this is probably, I guess, under your rubric, but I'll jump in if you'd like. With Biden's administration appearing to be more inclusive in the election of minorities to important offices and positions, is the Biden administration the dawn of a new era of American women in politics, women and minorities?
Wow, that's a good question. I guess it seems to be heading in that direction, but just to kind of pick up off the last comment, Trump has an awful lot of support that is going to keep this a very live and divided country going forward. There's an incredible set of demands that are being placed upon the Biden administration in terms of dealing with the Black Lives Matter movement, kind of spreading out equality and not having this just be democracy for the elite. So I think Biden has done a great job here of bringing in a diverse group of people. And that bodes well, but they're going to be handicapped. I mean, he is, Trump has a lot of voters that voted for him. He's raised over $240 million that can be used not just for his legal fees, which he's going to have a lot of, but also to start his 24 campaign, which he's promised to start on the day of the inauguration, right? So this is constantly going to be a push and pull between the Biden administration and kind of new world politics and old world politics. And I think we've got diversity that is shown its face. And the thing that I'm really impressed with Biden and what he's done is to embrace the idea of diversity as strength, as opposed to the threat that is causing reactionary populism to come shining through in countries around the world. So I think that's what we're looking for, is this idea for us to finally embrace diversity as a strength, much in the way that you would from a Darwinian argument, not social Darwinism, but the idea about biological diversity is one of the defenses that an organism has against foreign invaders, right? So I love the new move to being more diverse and having broader representation. It's been held back for far too long. And I don't think we'll be able to dial this back, which is a good thing. But Trump is going to give us a good run for the money, I think.
Thank you.
A question that I related to that is, I'm curious as to what the possibilities of how the media will play the Trump phenomenon after he leaves office in those 4 years. I mean, how much air are they going to continue to give him, or will they suffocate him, so to speak? But how the media reacts to this in the next 4 years, I think would be quite interesting.
Sure.
Well, the conventional logic and past experience tend to suggest that they will not abandon him, far from that, both because of the obvious materialistic business type reasoning, because it is source of income, because of his attractivity, because of the transgression plus added values that are always extremely prosperous, say, in many, not all, but many of the avenues of media prosperity and media success, and of course ratings and audiences and all that. So at the outset, I would say yes, if there's someone who's hoping that because of the fact that this gentleman will not anymore be present physically at the White House and will be an exercising president in exercise, I wouldn't place too many hopes on that. On the other hand, I'll nuance that because of the famous dynamics element, because we have always tendency to check on what is in front of us due to the fact that we seem to know, or we pretend we had sufficiently studied and understood the way past and present phenomena do develop and get more influential or less influential. In the case of populism, in the case of playing with the truth, in the case in daring pretension of truth, which could be plural, alternative truth concept, so to speak, we should be more cautious. We don't know. I mentioned the reality show ingredients in Trump's career and in Trump's behavior and in Trump's policies even. We don't know which way that would, we shouldn't forget that, the traditional notions regarding media studies as to, from centers to consumers are really, we have done over a very few number of years an extraordinary itinerary, right? Centers are weaker, the social networks are all over the place. I don't see the signs where they're getting weaker. On the contrary, not only they're not getting weaker, I'm speaking about social networks and so-called alternative media in comparison to old media giants and those who pass the word and actually create the media consumption physiognomics, right? So I think that what will be heading, what is ahead of us, could be trickier. We'll have less of Trump, of course, through major avenues, but it does not mean that it would be necessarily less dangerous or more promising on the medium-long run.
Yeah, I guess even with that, and Joav, this is just maybe a question for you from me. I've always been fascinated also with like the role of media in a democracy, for a democracy to function. And in that, we obviously know the media monopolies that pretty much sharing the same news. Like there's 6 headlines, you'll hear that 25,000 times in a day. And then the electorate or the population is not necessarily interested. So you have like the informed public, that's barely what, like some 20% here. I'm being, pretty, I guess, lenient about that. And then you have the uninterested public. They're like, oh, well, we've elected our people. And then you have the uninformed and couldn't care less, the water cooler talk people who are like looking at their TikToks and Instagrams to see what news is. And in that, I'm not certain, like for you, would the media monopolies through mainstream media, even if it's limited to, US, North America, and European interests or economic interests, be more useful than sort of going the route of this any and everything media? You feel like it's alternative because you're getting like an additional something that's not controlled by a media company like AT&T or Walt Disney. So you feel like, oh yeah, I'm getting my own news. But here I'm really talking about that 80% of like uninterested, uninformed public that goes out there and votes based on some frivolous something.
Yeah, these are you mentioned several crucial points in whatever we want to think about what is happening and what may be happening tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I'll just single out 2 of them amongst the things, those crucial elements you mentioned, Ruchi. One of them is the purely commercial, so to speak. I mean, how many people are going to watch which kind of media source and therefore be influenced or potentially influenced? Look, this afternoon, I took a look for 2 minutes, just zapping from one channel to the other. In France right now, I don't know what we should call it, mass central traditional media, but there are 4 non-stop 24/24 news channels in France. This is relatively new in France in comparison to the States, but 4, okay? It was around 4 p.m. in the afternoon. People were putting 2 vehicles in fire next to the Place de la République on the margin of one more demonstration regarding precisely liberty of the press and what journalists will be able or not to do regarding police activities related, of course, to police violence issues, which is also an issue which is a global one, or at least a global one, in terms of the Western democracies, right? So here to your question, I mean, and they stayed with those 2 vehicles in fire and a little bit of agitation around it. There were about 25,000 people demonstrating rather peacefully 100 meters away from them. But okay, so what's the delivery here? Okay, it's obvious, right? So this is one element. The second element is that of accumulated empowerment, namely social media, and the fact that we're getting more and more away from so-called old media is not just about the proliferation of media actors. Of course, it plays an important role, but it is perhaps even trickier regarding the aspects of empowering individuals and groups and communities. Because if I can post my opinion regarding our colloquium, right? I'll have a nice post on my Facebook account right after the end of our session. And I don't know how many followers I have, but I can actually check on that and be pleased by the fact that this time I'm going to have 28 followers rather than 16 I had yesterday on another issue. I'm playing a role. I'm a media speaker. I'm there. I'm present. I'm influential. I'm within this huge, sure enough, cosmos in which I contribute my voice, my post, my link, my transfer capacities of other items to being a mediator. I'm stronger. I have more power, me individual, okay? So this is extremely relevant regarding so many other aspects of the political game and political art and elections, of course, but also empowerment on the community level. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave it here because there are some other very interesting points in what you mentioned, Ruchi.
Okay, thank you much, Joav. Chloe, I'm gonna not, instead of transcribing the questions, I'll just have them switch on their cameras and jump in. Chloe, did you want to jump in with a question that you had about Trump and what happens to him once he gets out of office?
Yes. So a lot of people have mentioned what is the Trump presence going to be after he leaves office? Can he do more damage outside of the White House than within it? But I was wondering, Dr. Yates, what you saw as the possibility of him being charged with anything after he leaves office, what that might be, but also what I've seen a couple of headlines about him potentially giving preemptive pardons to some of his friends, and what legally, how viable that is, and just your thoughts on that. And I also have a question for Professor Toker regarding media after this.
Yeah, so first, let's start with the preemptive pardons because it's the most proximate in the news. So a pardon is, of course, a pardon for something. So there's not a carte blanche that exists that sort of clears you of any kind of charge whatsoever, as there is in the diplomatic world, where you can enjoy a sort of immunity from all criminal charges. And so what Trump can try to do is try to think through the various crimes that he and his clan have committed and design preemptive pardons for those behaviors. But the presidential power does not extend to just everything. And what's interesting is, in addition to having the Mueller report and the crime of collusion, Mueller very clearly stated there is a statute of limitations, but in this first year of the Biden presidency, it is possible to take the Mueller report, and there is sufficient evidence already in that report to charge Donald Trump, no longer a sitting president, with the crime of collusion. But in addition to that, those and other such crimes, Trump also has major tax problems. And that's what Al Capone was put away for in the end. Not any of his actual crimes, but not paying his taxes. Trump is facing a series of state-level charges, ranging from liability for his shady real estate problems to corporate misfeasance. Then he's got a plethora of cases that will be brought up by people who claim to have been sexually harassed by him, racially discriminated against by him. So the number and variety of cases would defy his ability to think through everything and design hundreds of pardons for himself. So yes, he's going to be attacked in the courts. That's a certainty. He does have the ability to defend himself. Most of those charges will not be fruitful, but all it takes is one. All it takes is one for him to go to jail. And
would any of that, Douglas, sorry to interrupt, would any of that you think impact his chances of running again the Democrat card? Because it seems to me that people are saying Biden's not going for a second term. Kamala Harris is going to be the front runner for the Democrats. Trump is planning to come back 2024. So would any of these charges, real or potential, be go against him to stand or run for a second time, you think?
If he's convicted of a crime, that he would have some qualification difficulties. As an ex-convict. We did have a socialist candidate who actually ran his campaign in the early 20th century from prison. So there are precedents for that, but precisely the socialist candidate who had been a repeated candidate again and again, that movement petered out. The labeling of being imprisoned it works against the candidates in America because we have a bias against prisoners. So he won't be, say, like Nelson Mandela or so on. But also being in prison will limit his capacity to continue his activities. Once you're in prison, you don't have the ability to tweet, to regularly communicate.
Oh, that would be nice.
With viewers. And I watched him whip the intelligence community and the domestic police forces for 4 years. I'm sure there's some disgruntled officers who are going to be interested in investigating and getting to the bottom of a variety of malfeasance. Some of the things he's been accused of range with working in Atlantic City, working with organized crime, and that involved acts of murder, collusion, cover-up, obstruction of justice, and those are crimes that he could be held accountable for. And then, of course, the intelligence community can now trace his activity, which we're well aware of, with Russia, and that, I mean, that's an open secret. It was simply he's denying it, and he was president. But the things for which Michael Flynn was pardoned, and Paul Manafort and the rest, that's actual treason that he's facing, and those are serious crimes. So any one of them can get him. And
yeah, thank you, Douglas. Okay, great. I believe there's a question for Joav, for you again, Professor Toker. Go ahead, Chloe. If you want to also put on your cameras, I'm struggling with seeing just names on there. So when you speak, it'd be nice for you to just, yeah, there you are. How are you? You're muted.
Myself.
Okay.
Yes, I couldn't find
awesome.
the unmute button. Good, thank you. Yes, so I have another question regarding media for Professor Toker, who I've never actually spoken to in real life, so enchanté. But so I've seen, you know, of course, there's tons of talk about fake news, the spread of, you know, untruths over Facebook, etc. And then in the tech world, there's a lot of discussions about Google and Facebook and Apple and cookies, and I'm just not seeing an overlap of the two. So I was wondering, I mean, if you know, I don't know if you know much about the technical aspect of it, but how you see the influence of Google and others on these media truth issues. For example, Google and Apple are changing their cookie systems. Apple in the next few months, I think it's January. Facebook only allows their own ads on their platform. News companies are relying on Google to survive. Google's now giving grants to various news outlets, making them dependent on them. Their biggest grantee is in the media is Reuters. And so for me, I see a clear overlap of the spread of misinformation, and then certain corporations, Google, Facebook, Apple, and their monopoly on cookies and user ID data. And I was just wondering how these things fit together.
You're wondering for so many good reasons, Chloe. Yeah, there are good news and bad news here. I mean, at least following the way I interpret it. The bad news, and they are built-in bad news, is that those giants, GAFA, and they are everything. I mean, they are producers, they are distributors, they are mediators. They are in Wall Street, they are a source of income, they are to some extent, of course, political influencer by themselves. I'm not speaking just due to the fact that the impact of the business they're doing, the technology they operate, and the alliances they may create amongst themselves are, of course, influential by definition. The good news is that things are moving in terms of trying, and then perhaps tomorrow succeeding in introducing a little bit of discipline and a little bit of order and a little bit of law, written applied laws in the domain of activities of the giant Silicon Valley and others players. And we've seen a little bit of that for good or bad motivations over the last few years in the Congress, on the Hill, in America. We've seen even more of that here in Europe, mainly in France. France is championing in that, at least rhetorically. I'm not sure the French would be extremely efficient in imposing some of these things, by the way, not only through media type avenues of action, but classically through money elements, through taxation, through percentages, preludes over activities and things which had proven to be more efficient than just laws and principles and ethics regarding the liberty of expression and the commitment to truth, etc. So things are moving, and they will be moving. Now, will they be moving in a speeder path than the counter phenomena, that of more and more power to social networks and to individuals through the giants? Will there be alliances between the big ones which might neutralize some of the efficiency in new legislation, or a new sense of political control, democratic control would be exercised regarding the extremely powerful players? I don't know. I mean, but at least the action is here with these bad things and good things competing with each other, and that wasn't the case 3-4 years ago. That was not the case. A year and a half ago, it was hardly the case. It is more and more the case, and that's, I believe, positive.
Great. Thank you, Joav. Hold on, let me just check my chat real quick. All right. I don't see any more questions floating there. So if anyone who's already logged in wants to ask a speaker, or amongst us.
Hello, everyone.
Is that Fazola?
Yes.
I can't believe it. I recognize your voice, Fazola. Switch on your camera. We want to see you.
Well, it's not really working, but I'll try to. Do you see me?
No, but that's fine. But that, oh, there you are.
Cool. So, hello, everyone, and I'm so happy to see you, Dr. Ruchi, and rest of my dear professors. So actually, I have a question, but for Professor Habibi, and but I'm afraid that it might be a little bit out of place. So the question is, like, recently, Trump administration influenced Arab states to sign treaty of peace with Israel. Do you think that this movement will help Palestine to build peaceful relationships with Israel, or this movement towards peace is to kind of outstand their common foe for Iran? Because Biden administration showed an enthusiasm in getting back to Iranian nuclear deal. What do you think?
Oh, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
I know you were there also on Thursday night, so and you didn't put your camera on, so I think also maybe Professor Toker would also want to answer that question as well. So I'll just say a little bit and pass it on to him. I think indeed there's been this kind of policy of isolating Iran, so making friends with or bringing the enemies of Iran together. So and it's been pretty successful. The way it will affect Palestine, I think, my opinion is that Palestine is going to feel more and more isolated, in the sense that there was a time when the Palestinian cause was automatically gained all the support of the Arab world, because it was sort of an Arab country, a Muslim country, and it went without saying that no Arab state would actually go and make a kind of a pact with the enemy of. Clearly, I think we've moved away from that, and it's definitely been a policy in the Trump administration. In other words, their peace, their way of bringing peace to the Middle East is slightly different to the kind of things we'd seen before. I don't know if Professor Toker wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, hello Fazola, nice to see you. You see, you illustrate. You are on our Zoom meeting vocabulary. You are a user, right? That's what I see next to your frame there. You're a user.
Oh, I
right?
see. Well, I will try to change next time so
No,
that my name appears.
I know, I guess it's an automatic thing which your tablet or computer introduce it, but I'm jumping on it because it makes a point which pleases me in terms of, you know, some of the vocabulary I use speaking about great concepts regarding media studies and insights. So, dear user, Fazola, I have a slightly more optimistic anticipation on what is going to happen in the Middle East. Regarding the Palestinians, I'm not speaking about the Iranian nuclear the confrontation with Israel, with America. I'm speaking about the Palestinian question. But my optimism is really more structural, because I think that there can't be really a lower point in the destiny of the Palestinian people than more or less where they are right now. Well, there can be, of course, even more alarming and bad situations there. I mean, there's never a limit to that. But my feeling is that we'll be reaching a point in which whatever happens would be for the better, for a relative better. I have in mind the natural change of leadership within the Palestinian Authority, just the way nature works, to the fact that there will be someday elections within the Palestinian institutions, which hadn't been the case for more than a decade, that something may be moving within the Israeli internal political system after also, I wouldn't say stagnation, but at least the same type of power for over a decade, that also will not last forever. You add to that what we're talking about, namely a more reasonable administration in America, reasonable also in terms of the classical ambitions which characterize what America was trying to do for a very long time in the Middle East. So you put all these together, you see perhaps some reasons for relative optimism. I'll just add that the Middle East had taught us that real new dramatic developments arrive when you don't expect them to arrive. And unfortunately, the great majority of these are rather bad and negative than positive. So I just present these elements, and we'll have to check on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Toker.
Great, thank
Professor
you.
Roland, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, is that?
No, go ahead, Roland.
No, I will go after you.
All right, I just have a quick question for you. Now it slipped my mind. No, the question dealt with the aspect of the structural inequalities within the country. And Biden has pushed forward the issue of climate change. But my curiosity is, did people of color or did marginalized people in the country who voted for him, did they vote for climate change? Or did they vote for the structural, to do something with the economic and the structural inequalities which are persistent within the country? And I haven't read and I haven't heard what his policies are towards this. And yes, there's been a lot of talk about a diverse cabinet, but this cabinet that is so diverse, once you reach that level, we're all sort of the same. We have the same ideology. We have the same thought processes. So we're sort of 2 or 3 removed from marginalization and poverty.
Mm-hmm.
Did that come across?
Yeah, if I'm getting your question correctly, you're sort of asking how the Biden administration, although he speaks a lot about climate change and environmental issues, how he's going to be addressing the issues of like the lower income minority populations that in fact do suffer the environmental bads, if I'm getting it right?
To a degree, no, I'm saying that Atlanta flipped Democratic, and that's because of the immigration of Black people. But we did not, I don't think that the majority of people of color voted for climate change. We voted to change the structural racism within the country.
Right.
What's the move in that direction with that?
So I guess I can speak to the overlap between these two issues that you're pointing out to. And I think the key word there would be environmental justice. which is really sort of the movement that talks about how low-income and minority people have been distanced from environmental and other policy decisions in terms of procedure, but then also in terms of distribution, and particularly concerning, let's say, the environmental issues. I know that as compared to Trump, who had basically totally unfunded, defunded, removed the Environmental Justice Division of the EPA Superfund, is going to get put back in place. And so I know it's two different things, but I think environmental justice comes out of a movement that does already recognize the distinctions of race, class, gender, and the people who are marginalized from the mainstream of politics, leave alone also environmental issues, also Superfund sites, So I personally, again, even for that, I think right now it's really more lip service than actual action. But as we speak, I believe that the Environmental Justice Division is going to be put right back in place, is going to be funded. They're talking about like $2 trillion, something like that, for climate change, but environmental justice. So I think it goes in the same lines as trying to somehow diversify, represent in his cabinet, but also in the upper echelons of decision making. Again, from the face of it, I'm loving it. I don't remember seeing an American cabinet selection that's been as diverse. When you have someone who's heading Homeland Security be like a Hispanic, like when have you seen that? Oh, a woman leading something dealing with national security, something, you're like, wow. So again, it's still lip service, but I think those two issue areas are very closely, if not belong to the same box, really, of the hierarchies in society that are linked with socioeconomic distinctions that sort of exclude people of color, exclude minorities. And so put in a conglomeration with the climate change issues, then we call it environmental justice. But justice issues remain the same. Procedural. Do they get to vote? How much do they get to vote? If they get to vote, are they represented? Who's representing them? Is there someone of their own color, their own voice representing them? And the second one, as a result of their lack of representation in these decision-making bodies, are we seeing a distributional impact that has hurt them more? So again, before, after, I'd say I think we're looking for at least 4 years of some sort of recognition and perhaps accountability in that domain. I'm not sure if that's exactly your question, but I don't see a way to separate them out just because you have the layers, and then on top of that, you have like this additional layer of the environmental bads.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I would differ with saying that different color doesn't mean different ideology.
I'm going to jump in here and agree with Michael. Hey, Michael, we're usually on different sides, but as minorities in America and Biden very aware of the identity politics in America, when push comes to shove in America and he needs to pick between a mine or a factory or a what have you, a slaughter plant, instead of environment, I think Biden and his cohorts, regardless of who the person is, a person of color, the administrator, they're going to go with the worker and they're going to screw over the environment in the end, Dr. Anand. I think that's what Michael is saying. And I think that's what we think is going to happen in America.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I don't think that will happen.
So you sound disagree, Edgardo. Let's get that.
Edgardo, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is just because he has a diverse cabinet doesn't mean ideology is diverse.
No.
And this seems to come across the board repeatedly in the States. If we put a brown person, a woman, a minority, then ideology is diverse, but it isn't.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And already I think over there you have sort of like the elitist conception of what democracy is. So you put some color, add some hyphenated names that represent certain people, and then, and I know Biden-Harris, like already getting a lot of, tough questions about this diversification of the cabinet, what that really means. At the end of the day, you have to take into account like the upper class, politicians who are pretty much professionals. They know how to do their job. They're wearing their color. I mean, Kamala Harris included. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, I think there is the administrative structure, the organizational procedures that you can't change, and even if you wanted to. And I think Obama, being a very good-minded person, came in with all these ideals. 8 years later, he had more drones and more attacks and more, to his card than he ever would like to accept. I think it's their standard operating procedures. A person of color fits into it, looks all pretty on paper, makes a nice picture, calms down all the agitations. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's still in the realm of lip service. But somehow I have more hope with this administration, because like I said, I haven't seen this degree of like boldness in making cabinet picks and saying things the way they are. And I think he's backed by other presidents in the, like Obama is working closely with him, and Clinton and all that. If it doesn't make it any better or cleaner, but what I'm saying is it just seems more bipartisan in a way, in the way he wants to do it. Again, how it'll work out, we don't know yet. We haven't even reached the transition. God forbid if Mr. Trump doesn't want to leave. I'm actually, predicting perhaps a very violent transition. And here I'm not talking about peaceful protests outside saying, oh, Trump, the elections were rigged. Like literally, this man is probably going to have to be bodily lifted by the CIA and some military personnel to get him out of there. So, all the talk about democracy, like the checklists are good. But at the end of the day, you're right. Like adding color may not necessarily lead to results. But I'll open it up to the rest of you all as well. Dominique, you haven't spoken in a while. Don't sleep off. Tell us what you think.
About what?
Well, I guess Michael was sort of getting into like, issues of diversification and diversity being represented in a democracy. And
I see. Yeah. Well, but of course, this is American politics, and I think United States system, United States democracy is very different from what we see here in Europe. I think the racial problem is probably much more acute in the United States for historical reasons that it ever has been in Europe, because we never had a problem with racial minorities the way the United States has. I mean, if I take the example of Switzerland, I mean, the prefect of the district where I live here is a Haitian, comes from Haiti, and he's very colored, and it has never been a problem. But of course, we hardly have any, we don't have a clash with the minorities. So I think our experience in this respect is very different. Maybe the case of France is also a particular case. If you look, for instance, at French TV, if you just look the names of the journalists and people appearing on TV, I mean, then the number of people who have, I would say, names that do not belong what somebody called the French tradition, meaning, of course, people from overseas, from former colonies, especially from North Africa. You have a huge amount of people who really are of North African origin in a country where there is a bit more of racial disparities. And but of course, these people, I mean, are from the, if you look at them, the face is not so much distinguishable from the ordinary French people. And so, of course, this puts the whole problem, I think, in a different context.
I want to actually debate you here, because I mean, having lived in Europe for like 20 years, lived in France for 20 years, I'm not certain that the issues are different. I think that in Europe, and I'm not very familiar with like Switzerland, but like right here in France, I think that hiding under the hat of secular is a very easy, convenient way to forget about like the diversities that really exist in day-to-day culture, politics, and as we've seen recently, police brutality. And I think that the dialogue that the US has begun, and for that I really applaud like how in fact everything is put to test, everything is open, or most everything compared to here. I think we've only started talking about racism and perhaps classism recently. It's a new phenomenon, at least in France I can say that. I don't know, Mariam, what you think, but for me, I really feel like secular is a convenient way to kind of like put everything under the hat and say, on est tous pareils, we're all the same. We don't really look at race, class, gender, nationality, religion. We all are the same. We are French. But come on, like how many times would like a white French guy get stopped compared to like a black French tourist? So I think there's issues. To simplify, what I'm saying is I'm not sure that it's because it's cleaner and better in Europe that we don't talk about it. I think in the US, we talk more about it, we fight more about it. And so it just seems like a big, huge issue, which in fact is here, ready to explode one day or another, if not already been the case. Mariam?
You've said it. I do agree.
Like, I know you do so much work on identity.
No, I mean, it's a huge, huge topic. I mean, it really is. It's you know, the so-called, you know, Republican identity is, I think it was something worth admiring a while ago, but I think unfortunately in France they haven't really they haven't really agreed, they haven't really come face to face with the changes that have been happening. So anyway, it's a huge topic. We could talk about it at length, but I think
I guess maybe Dominique can respond to that, because basically we're saying it's not all that pretty in Switzerland or in France or in, you know, any of these parts. It's just that we don't talk about it.
Well, it's not exactly what I meant to say, actually, because I think if you take well, in my view, of course, I'm not a specialist of United States, but I refer to a remark that I had, that the friend of an American friend who was a diplomat, actually a high-level diplomat in the United States, specialist of China, he referred to the fact that to this problem, why is it that half of America is voting for Trump? And I told him, well, it seems that the Republican Party has become a kind of sect. And in some way it has, because nobody even dares to say that Trump has won the elections. I mean, it's a kind of taboo that is very typical of a sect somehow. But what he answered is that it's not only a problem of the Republican Party. He says that America is still bearing the weight of the heritage of slavery and the big divide between white and black. I think it goes much further down to history than it does in France. I'm not denying that there's a problem in France, and of course it's also related to French colonialism. But on the other hand, I have an impression in some ways the problem is much deeper in the United States. And I mean, somebody also tonight has referred to the fact that it's quite astonishing that 70 million Americans are voting for the Republican, for Trump. And it is something that really strikes me as being, I would say, almost something that you couldn't understand, because if you take the case of France, for instance, you have the extreme right, I mean, the Front National, that is extreme right and is accused of being racist, and is probably basically racist. But there was this kind of, there was a famous joint television broadcast before the presidential election between Macron and Marine Le Pen. And Marine Le Pen was so bad and so impossible during this dialogue with Macron with Macron. Her, I would say, inferiority, intellectual and whatever, compared to Macron was so manifest. She lost, I mean, and it seems to me that it was logical that she would lose the elections. If I compare this to the example of Trump, I mean, Trump won by being impossible, by being, I mean, just by being Trump. And this is quite astonishing that he could convince half of the population. And I think the problem of racism also plays a role. You have also a problem of religion that is quite different.
Yeah, though I think in the case of Trump and the African American vote that seemed curious in the face of his extreme racist talk and behavior. Like for me, I think, well, in theory, again, we call it like internalized racism, where you know who you are, and by being part of a group and a cohort that bashes the Black people and the Hispanics, and in Trump's case, the foreigners. So I think xenophobia allows a lot of these African Americans to be part of like the Trump clique of America first, us first, make America great again. And in a sense, they are able to put like race dynamics, which are obviously huge, in the back burner, because Trump has been really honing in on like, you know, the outsiders, the terrorists, the immigrants, the Muslims. So I think somewhere that might explain the vote, because that really is something that is curious. And in my opinion, that's probably what happened. Like the Make America Great Again landed up including the very population that I think he's terribly violent to and against in words and in actions. But because he's got such a smart strategy of like saying, you're actually with us. It's the xenophobia. So we're going to get those guys out. So cut the Chinese and the Muslims and the travel ban. I don't know what you think about that, but I think that would be an explanation, in my opinion, of like an internalized racism where you feel more powerful being part of like the mainstream. Like rally the flag. I'm an American, you're not.
But there's something very interesting, I believe, in Michael Fraser's intervention a few minutes ago, which was lost a little bit in the debate which follows it, which is that element which says if I'm of that color of skin, doesn't mean I agree with, say, issues regarding the environment, right? Which is extremely true, which brings us back to internal equations in American political life, and in this sense, in Biden's administration, arbitration when it comes to giving preference, etc., etc. Because I have less illusions on that. Of course, the situation in Europe is not as violent on racial grounds as it is in the States, but Black Lives Matters is in Europe, although it takes, of course, forms which do not resemble to Ferguson or to Seattle. So the issues are there, and you find it even or even in a more acute way in non-democratic countries across the world, places like North Africa or Turkey, etc. So it is the power of American agenda, including American internal political agenda. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it has such a power over so many other things which are taking place worldwide, which of course comes back to where we started, which is that the fact that we are seeing a change of administration and a radical, I hope, change in overall orientations is so important to so many other countries, although the immediate correlation might seem invisible or sort of fadey or flu, right? It is so important. So even an issue such as if Biden is about to give up something on his environmental options because he needs to do a political gestures regarding minorities, let them be black or brown or others, even that is potentially very important as to what is happening in remote places elsewhere.
Michael, you can respond, agree, disagree. And you're muted if you're trying to talk. I see
No, I
Brianna's
think
turning on her camera, so it looks like she has a question brewing. She's
that's the
gathering.
correct concept, because when we're dealing with structural economic, and it's just not people of color that are poor in America. You know, there's poverty in America that is very unusual at this time period. So climate change, a diverse cabinet, will this trickle down to marginalized people across the board who are of poverty seems to go across the board in the States. So that is the question. And like you said, Dr. Now, we have to wait and see what happens. We don't know. It's still new. He's just beginning, but this is what I'm waiting to see.
Yeah.
May I interject a little bit just before the thought leaves me, because the conversation is progressing quite quickly. But if I could go back for a moment to what Dr. Anand is actually speaking on from Michael's initial question, and regarding like how some minorities do tend to veer towards, I guess, Trumpism, if you will. I feel like in regards to being a minority in America and other minorities that are considered non-Black, there's this idea of collective whiteness that is very heavy, meaning that a lot of non-Black minorities in the United States and globally feel like through aligning themselves with super conservative ideas, they can be socially closer to whiteness, because some ethnicities have, if you could call it, the chance or the opportunity through this concept of American democracy and the American dream to essentially become white in a very social way that African Americans do not get the opportunity to, irregardless of economic status, if you will. So yes, exactly, the internalized racism, but I just feel like the idea of the collective white that provides this essential false hope to non-Black minorities is very strong in regards to Trumpism and what he kind of sells or panders to more privileged minorities, if you will. So that's my thought.
I'm gonna disagree with you, Brandon. I mean, I love you like a sister, but the issue goes beyond race. My family migrated to America, where I'm an immigrant. If you want to call me a wetback, call me a wetback. I don't mind that. But I have cousins and friends who are now anti-immigrant, and it has nothing to do with being Trumpist. It's that they have a family, or they have a business now, and the immigrants that are arriving now are hurting them.
Right.
And so they're saying, yes, build the wall. And so when I talk to these friends and family, I'm telling them, hey, that was us 30 years ago. And they're like, yeah, that's great. I get it. I get the ideology, but they're hurting me now. And that's all they matter. It has nothing to do with I'm white, I want to be white, the whites or whatever. It's just a dollar issue. And then when Trump ended the J-1 visa of the Europeans coming over the summer, again, these are immigrant like me, being anti-immigrant, saying, yes, keep those Europeans out. So I think a lot of the time it goes beyond the racial issues, the money issue. And I think this is why Trump hit a nerve, because it was hitting that issue. So here are very lower class people. We're immigrants, we're lower class, we're poor, and yet favoring Trump because it was hurting them with this immigration issue. So I think it goes beyond, yes, race matters, trust me, and yes, but it goes beyond that too.
Well, it's not about the specific race, it's about the opportunity that's therefore connected to whiteness, not necessarily like quite literally being like a white individual, but I'm just saying that like socially, like the American dream is connected to proximity, to white ideals is my point. So some minorities do connect themselves and associate themselves with what are considered white ideals with the opportunity and hoping that one day they will become a part of the collective white, will become a part of opportunity, will become of what they perceive to be survival in a systemically oppressive like system. And some minorities just simply, for example, African Americans, do not get the opportunity to become a part of the collective white, regardless of what we align ourselves with, which makes it even more ridiculous when you see, like, for example, Black Trump supporters. But, for example, there was a time in America where Italians were not considered to be white, where Irish were not considered to be white. But as time progresses, like you said, how 30 years ago, you were like, that was us. Yes, that was you. But the reason why people now do not want to associate themselves with more liberal ideas is because they do want to be a part of that collective white, where in 30 years they can separate themselves even more. So like, that's more so what I'm saying. It's an attachment to what could be as opposed to like what is.
Yeah, no, those are difficult issues. And I think you're all pointing to the intersectionalities. You can't divorce discussion of race from class, gender, nationality, ethnicity, power status, and depending on where you are, those intersectionalities will definitely determine to how it is going to play out. And I think Ambassador Dreyer mentioned that race has a much more historic meaning, like in the US, especially when you talk African Americans. But different races don't have the same kind of historical baggage nor
the idea of being,
so then,
the idea of being white in America is completely different from the idea of being white in France or somewhere else. And that's why it's important to culturally like distinguish where this idea of whiteness comes from or being black comes, because it's not the same everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, just like you all, like the Indian American community, like Indians in the US, a lot of them landed up voting Trump over Biden. And you're like, wait a minute, what don't you get? But like you were saying, Edgardo, like their business interests, their class interests, and also somewhere like feeling like the inside cohort because they're part of that inner circle of like the powerful, like the top-notch doctors and engineers and multinational, you know, of course. You talk to the Indian who's trying to get to the States and who's not going to get his H-1B visa to get in. It's a different story. They're not the same Indian. We have the label for the brown people, but it's not the same thing. So I think intersectionality is very important too.
And oops, sorry. I was going to say, I also feel like there's a struggle within oppressed communities to not be the most oppressed of the oppressed. So it develops this crab in a barrel mentality. Like when you are a part of an oppressed, you know, group of people, nobody wants to be the oppressed of the oppressed. And in that, people tend to try to kind of oppress each other within the oppressed groups to get out of this crab in a barrel situation that systemically we have all been put into, which is what we have to be really careful to avoid.
Yeah, but Brianna, my original question was, how are you going to change climate? How will you link climate change to structural equality within the country?
I was more so kind of focusing on what Dr. Anand had elaborated it off of. Going back to your original question, I totally see what you're saying. I'm not sure how Biden intends on tying that all together, because I feel like environmental issues are kind of privileged issues sometimes. It tends to be a popular culture issue that's not necessarily assigned to the people that it tends to.
But that's what maybe is misconstrued. Like think global act local, think local act global, or think global act local. Like I think you have to separate that out. Like any issue you pick at that level that you're calling very elitist, where you know the straight white men in blue suits roam around air-conditioned places. If you really think hard, it's linked to you. But of course, it will require you to make some compromises between your care for the environment and you losing a job. And I think that's where the debate is. If the government or whichever president comes in doesn't know what to do to be able to subsidize or provide alternatives to people who are going to lose jobs because he's going to stop fracking or going to take away from, you know, coal or dirty industry, I think that would be the obvious way to get people who do care about their own oppression in the environmental problem, give them the alternatives. Of course, if you tell them you care about, you know, that the earth is going to like break itself and fracture, that's where the word fracking comes from, in like 20 years versus, you know, you're not going to have a job like as soon as Biden takes over. Of course, you'll pick someone who's going to keep your job going. But the minute you say, all right, we're going to stop fracking, but here's what you're going to get to be able to phase out your job and give you an alternative, people will take it. So I'm not sure they're as distant as one would like to think it is. And that's what I think people like Trump have made us believe, that all these guys talk about climate, it's bullshit. Look how hot it is at some days and so cold it is. I mean, his quotes just drive me nuts. I'm going, this is the president of like, you know, the US, like talking like literally, I mean, I wouldn't even, whatever. So like, I mean, when you hear him 20 times over, you just think that fracking is good for you, coal is good for you, you know, the car industry, the cement industry is good for you, the pipelines are good for you, of course, because you're not going to lose your job over it. But it's all linked. I don't think that it's an elitist issue at all. I mean, it concerns all of us.
I think,
but, you know, it is 9 o'clock. So as the master of ceremonies, I will first